there is a uniform response to all crises like this, whether it's the 2017 back-to-back hurricanes that hit the Caribbean, whether it is the Paris attacks in 2015, whether it is the Myanmar coup just last year, or the Turkey coup. In every case, whenever you have human beings, populations that are disrupted and under duress with access to clean food, water, shelter, and there is a threat, and that threat can be obviously other human beings, or in natural disasters, it can be the elements. What's uniform about all these situations is you have a threat, whatever that might be, man-made or natural, and you typically have to move people away from that threat. So in this case, the first thing that you're going to see happen in the Ukraine, which happens in every scenario, is the airspace goes away. You can no longer fly out commercially. Shortly behind that, you lose public transportation. Shortly behind that, you typically lose train capability. What you end up with is a very small number of vehicles, buses, sprinter vans, things like that, that can move the population. They're now under duress. And then, of course, if it's land-based, you're always looking to how do I get to the next border? So it doesn't matter if it's man-made or natural disaster. It's always very much uniform in the response and how you manage this. Ukraine is being invaded by Russia by three sides. At a macro level, no one truly knows what's going to happen next. No matter what government agency or what's being reported, no one truly knows. We're all guessing based on history, trends, and what we're seeing happening on the ground. Ultimately, we don't believe this is going to go away anytime soon. I think from a pure Russian mindset, and this is very difficult for Western, Europeans, Americans, and I would assume Australians to really grasp, is if you were the Russian mindset and you had a quote unquote force bumping up against you, in this case, NATO and Europe and the US pushing towards Russia, the Ukraine is the last stand for them. They're not going to let this go. So there's two ways to look at this. There's a short-term result, and there's a long-term play. The short term, I think we're all hopeful that we get to some level of a stalemate. There's some kind of diplomatic concession, whether Russia is given the Donbass area on the eastern side, it's yours, you now own Donbass, you own Crimea, and we get the Russian troops to get out of the country after they've done enough damage and take enough terrain. And then there's a diplomatic solution. That would be the ideal short-term solution. The counter to that is the Russians might just not stop. And I think from the Russian perspective, they cannot lose. They'll throw every asset, everything they have at this to quote unquote win tactically. And if they can't win, this is the scary scenario. They pull everyone out and they park a tactical nuclear bomb in Kiev and say, we won. The other long-term scenario, which is less dramatic, is if they quote unquote find themselves to win tactically, and then they pull out because they take the Donbass, they take Crimea, they get influence on the government in Kyiv, the capital. We all kind of get our breath back. We see some level of normalcy. Know this in the long term, though. This won't go away. They're going to keep coming and coming and coming, whether it's diplomatic or it's combat operations. This is not going to go away. Russia will not stop until ultimately in the long term, we don't think they're going to stop until they take the country. So this is going to ebb and flow. It's not going to end quickly. No one really knows what happens tomorrow. And I think we're all kind of watching and waiting and trying to figure out what's really going on in Vladimir Putin's head to see if we can find a way out of this.
I guess my follow-up question to that is, does it go away if Putin goes away?
So we do believe there is real pressure. There are indications that right now, the most powerful oligarchs and people within his own government are questioning this decision. They are questioning that. I think there was a lot of assumptions made. In 2014, they took the Crimea in southern Ukraine. without a shot fired. I think they made very bad assumptions that the Ukraine of today is the Ukraine of 2014, and it simply is not. They've been trained, they've been reinforced, they have equipment, technological capabilities, and most importantly, that population now has found nationalism, and they don't want to move towards communism. They are full in looking to the future as a democracy. That's I believe the biggest mistake from Vladimir Putin and the Russians is they miscalculated that nationalism and the fact that they are now better and more capable of defending themselves. That being said, Russia has so much mass, so much equipment, it's almost inevitable if they are willing to take the losses, they could take Ukraine if they really commit to it. At great loss, but they could do it tactically.
I know you've been asked this question before, but I'd like to ask it today. Are you hearing any nervousness in any of the surrounding countries, like, say, Romania or Poland?
Yes. So no question, both countries, and primarily Poland, I'd say Poland more than Romania, but both are starting to ramp up, and here's why. As you look at where Russian forces are, they came in from Belarus from north to south. They're right outside of Kyiv. They came in and they already had the Donbass in the eastern side moving west. And they already had Crimea in the south, and they're starting to look towards going west towards Odessa. Ultimately, what they have not done yet is they have not moved west to the Polish, Hungary, Slovakian, Romanian border. But make no mistake, everyone is nervous that if they do decide we're all in, we're going to do it at all costs, that here's the risk. We get spillage into the Polish border. We get spillage into Romania. If that happens, even if it's a mistake, a tank thinks it's on GPS, it gets a bad grid, it crosses over, there's a firefight. We are now looking at the start of World War III, which everyone wants to, avoid. But yes, there is absolute now, we've reached now a phase where NATO, the US, and of course, those bordering countries are starting to think about reinforcements, activating reservists, getting their training, getting their equipment maintained. They're getting ready for that spillage. So it is very visceral today.
In terms of your own company thinking, but also when you engage with global leaders, do you think the thinking is immediate? Are we thinking what's going to happen this week? Or are we thinking what's going to happen in 10 years' time?
Yeah. So unfortunately, and I would say this is, and I'll be a little more critical of the United States. Our political system is short term. Our politicians are in 2-year slots or 4-year slots with the presidency of a maximum of 8 years. Unfortunately, our system demands everything is done in political cycles, which means short term. And yes, we have institutions, much like most Western or developed countries, to include Australia. You have a Department of Defense, a Department of Industry. Their job is to look over the horizon in long term. The issue is when we're looking at a crisis staring at us, our politicians are very short-term focused. And what happens is their directive, their guidance, their intent, even though we have institutions that are supposed to be looking long-term, end up looking short-term in many cases. So to my earlier point, and this is why I talk about this a lot to my client base, and frankly, the government agencies we're talking to is, look, I know we're staring at what's happening in the next day to the next week or month. Not many people are looking beyond a month out, but you have to be thinking in the back of your mind, even if we get a concession, this is not going away. This is going to endure one way or another. So I do think, to your point, I think that the simple and direct answer is we're much more focused on the short term, between tomorrow to a month out than we are what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years from now. And does Russia and China become one as allies and counterbalance to the West and so on and so forth? There are people talking about it. What I don't think is happening is we're not actually planning against those contingencies 5, 10, 20 years away. And that's really the critical part is somebody's got to have the lights on looking long term. And I don't think we do a very good job of that here in the US. And frankly, I'm not sure Europe is much better or other Western democracies are much better, frankly. It's
I'm-
hard.